Now on BBC One, the BBC News at 10 with Hugh Edwards.
Tonight at 10, the Prime Minister launches her election campaign with an outspoken attack on European politicians and officials. Speaking in Downing Street after the rising Brexit tensions of recent days, Theresa May accuses Brussels of not wanting Britain to prosper.
Threats against Britain have been issued by European politicians and officials. All of these acts have been deliberately timed to affect the result of the general election that will take place on the 8th of June.
The Prime Minister had visited the Queen at Buckingham Palace to mark the dissolution of Parliament, as political opponents accused Mrs May of poisoning the political atmosphere for partisan reasons.
Let's calm down, be serious, be sensible, and approach these very, very important negotiations with the seriousness they demand and deserve.
It is a cold and calculated choice by Theresa May to try and make our neighbours in Europe into our enemies just so that she can win a few more votes.
And from Brussels, another warning that the Brexit process will be a steep and rocky path for both sides. Also tonight, a student has been found guilty of planting a homemade bomb on a London Underground train.
Il semblait que vous aviez tenté de les infantiliser beaucoup dernièrement quand même.
Accusations of lying as the two candidates seeking the French presidency debate tonight ahead of Sunday's final round. The director of the FBI defends his decision to reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton weeks before the presidential election. And the most prestigious award in the world of British art boasts a rather more mature shortlist this year.
Coming up in Sports Day later in the hour on BBC News, Juventus score what could prove to be some very decisive away goals in their Champions League semi-final against Monaco.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has opened her election campaign by launching an outspoken attack on European politicians and officials, accusing them of trying to influence the outcome of the British general election. Mrs May also claimed that they were working against a successful Brexit deal. Her comments followed days of rising tension with Brussels. Opposition parties have accused the Prime Minister of poisoning the atmosphere and of conducting herself in a way that is unworthy of a British Prime Minister. Our political editor Laura Kuenssberg has more details.
What was on her mind with that raise of the eyebrows? Not just the formalities at the palace of revving up for an election, which she, remember, was not obliged to call. But Theresa May seems determined to play the Brexit card for all it's worth. Setting her face against Brussels, she wants you to believe she won't be messed around.
Whoever wins on the 8th of June will face one overriding task: to get the best possible deal for this United Kingdom from Brexit. And in the last few days, we have seen just how tough these talks are likely to be. Britain's negotiating position in Europe has been misrepresented in the continental press. The European Commission's negotiating stance has hardened. Threats against Britain have been issued by European politicians and officials. All of these acts have been deliberately timed to affect the result of the general election that will take place on the 8th of June.
Yes, she did just accuse some in the EU of interfering in our election.
The events of the last few days have shown that whatever our wishes and however reasonable the positions of Europe's other leaders, there are some in Brussels who do not want these talks to succeed, who do not want Britain to prosper. This Brexit negotiation is central to everything. If we don't get the negotiation right, if we let the bureaucrats of Brussels run over us, we will lose the chance to build a fairer society with real opportunity for all.
The last few days have seen the intensity of the jousting with the EU become even more troublesome. But using all the trappings of Downing Street, Theresa May has just upped the ante even further, even accusing some in Brussels of trying to make trouble in the general election.
Just who could she have had in her sights? The chief negotiator at the EU Commission?
I give the floor to Michel Barnier.
Days after a tense Downing Street dinner, among suggestions the UK would have to pay €100 billion as we leave the EU.
Some have created the illusion that Brexit would have no material impact on our lives, or that negotiations can be concluded quickly and painlessly. This is not the case.
More cryptically, less diplomatically, he said,
On apprend à mettre un pied devant l'autre.
Just like when hill walking, you have to learn the rules, or accidents happen.
If the last bill, you get that money down.
The government didn't start the day with a subtle message. The Tories eager to make disputed claims about Labour's plans for tax. But forget that. Every question was about the possible bill from Brussels. And rather from ramp up the row, those two had tried to tone it down.
Can I ask you both not simply to hide behind the fact that there will be negotiations? In this election, don't voters deserve to know how much of their taxpayers' cash they may be asked to stump up? Is that figure closer to 0 or 100 billion?
The public want one thing. They want a good outcome to this negotiation. They want the best possible outcome to the negotiation. We do that in the negotiating room, not by negotiating with a megaphone.
I'm not remotely surprised that people are manoeuvring for opening advantage in that negotiation.
That approach long gone by the afternoon. Above all else, it is election time. And Brexit creates opportunities and problems for every party.
I voted leave, and I'm proud to have voted leave, and I knew what I was voting for.
You're a very aggressive man as well. I don't think Theresa May can expect to be taken seriously. It is a cold and calculated choice by Theresa May to try and make our neighbours in Europe into our enemies just so that she can win a few more votes. It is a political decision by her, and it's not worthy of the office of Prime Minister.
I will fight it all the way for you.
Theresa May has some formidable foes, and they'll use this against her.
I think what we've seen today is her trying to make the EU the bogeyman in order to do that. But she's playing a dangerous game here, because by poisoning the atmosphere of these negotiations, she risks getting a bad deal or no deal.
Her rivals wonder if she really means it.
I don't think anyone in Brussels really believes that Theresa May is prepared to walk away without signing a comprehensive deal.
Doesn't seem to have a strong sense.
But it's Labour that's vulnerable in a big way. Theresa May is after their traditional support.
We will negotiate a Brexit that works for all, for the many, not the few. We won't threaten Europe on the way into Brexit. And above all, in this election campaign, we'll put forward a proposal and a plan for Britain, which is about dealing with inequality and injustice.
Behind the gates, Theresa May was never going to be the kind of politician simply to agree. But even in the heat of an election campaign, strong words cannot be unsaid.
Well, in a moment, we'll talk to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, in Brussels for her thoughts. But first, let's go to Westminster, and Laura is there, our political editor. Let's talk about the tone and the language deployed by Theresa May today, Laura, and the thinking behind it.
Well, Hugh, it's not so long ago that the Prime Minister repeated again and again there would be no running commentary over Brexit. And even yesterday, she was still sort of trying to stand by the idea that somehow this spat was just idle Brussels gossip. But this afternoon, blasting out from one of the most powerful microphones in the country in front of the shiny black door at the start of this election campaign, quite an extraordinary attack on her opponents in the Brexit negotiations. Now, the reasons for that, I think, are pretty clear. First of all, historically, British Prime Minister after British Prime Minister have enjoyed politically pointing that finger at unnamed forces in Brussels across the Channel. But the context here is different. The Tories are, I think, genuinely behind the scenes quite cross about how the last few days have unfolded with those aggressive unnamed briefings. But of course, this is an election time. We are at a crucial moment, not just in terms of the general election, but local elections right round the country where ballot boxes will open tomorrow morning. And the Tories sent opportunity here. Remember, nearly 4 million voters chose to UKIP at the last election. They think they can scoop up handfuls and handfuls of those votes and also pick off Labour voters, traditional Labour voters, so many of whom chose out in the referendum. So a lot of this is about positioning and opportunity in a general election. And I think it's fair to say in politics, by being strong and talking tough, you can win friends and influence, but go too far, sound excessive, bandy about strong accusations that can't be taken back. There is, of course, too, a risk you could get left out in the cold.
Laura, thanks. Let's go straight to Brussels and put some of those points then to Katya. First of all, Katya, your thoughts on what kind of impact, I suppose, this contribution by Theresa May today could have on the Brexit talks?
Well, Hugh, those Brexit talks haven't yet started. They're not going to start for several weeks now. So in that way, they do not impact immediately. There are no big talks or decisions that need to be made tomorrow. But we can see already how nasty things can get extremely quickly. There were no real sense of outrage here in Brussels at the Prime Minister's comments on the whole at an EU leadership level. These are being interpreted as comments made by a Prime Minister in the middle of an election campaign. They don't really expect her to talk down a war with Brussels, as it seems, if she thinks, as they believe she thinks, that she can score political points like that. But the atmosphere is souring.
Your sense, Katya, really of what's really at stake here? Are we talking about a kind of difference of culture in terms of politics and the way that people do business, or is it something more fundamental?
I think you're seeing a huge clash of political cultures here. You know, on the one hand, there's the cut and thrust of Westminster politics, where you live and die by the verbal sword, where you take your opponent by the scruff of their neck and you can destroy them. In mainland Europe, that's a pretty foreign idea. There's lots of coalition building. It's about consensual politics. And when it comes to negotiations between the UK and the EU, the mood music is important. At the moment, the EU's backs are up. And you can see how the mood has changed so fast. Almost a year ago, when the UK voted to leave the EU, there was dismay here. People were upset. There was a period of denial. And then there was a lot of talk about trying to keep the UK ever so close. Tonight, it's much more about the UK, already a third party, that sense, you know, held at arm's length, a difficult customer. But they will deal with that difficult customer. Angela Merkel, many years as a politician, of course, she knows that an EU deal, a EU-UK good deal, is important for both sides. So do business they will. But as I say, I mean, mood is bad and we can expect trouble again ahead.
Katya, once again, thanks very much. Katya Adler for us there. And Laura, thanks to you too at Westminster, Laura Kuenssberg. Well, Labour has said it will suspend the planned closure of some hospital services in England if it wins power next month and begin an immediate review of the proposals, which would see some accident and emergency departments and maternity units being downgraded or even closed. But the Conservatives claim that the NHS modernisation programme has been backed by senior doctors and nurses. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has been investigating.
Protests against NHS closures are nothing new, but in some communities like Huddersfield, concerns about cuts are growing. This protest last autumn was in reaction to plans to remove A&E services at the local hospital. Campaigners say people will suffer because of longer journey times.
Patients are going to be dispersed all around the north of the country, really. Those will involve longer trips, and the longer the trip, the more danger there is inherent in the situation.
I've been to hospitals in
Labour's John Ashworth, at a meeting of activists from Huddersfield and around West Yorkshire, said he wanted to halt closures, specifically by stalling NHS reform plans in England.
We're saying let's just halt them, let's just have a moratorium on them, and let's just step back and have a full review of them. And when we review them, let's involve the clinicians, but let's involve the people as well. Let's involve the public, because so far they've been cut out of the decisions and we don't think that's fair.
The NHS reform documents are known as Sustainability and Transformation Plans and have been published in 44 areas across England. Some involve hospital bed cuts and service reductions, with funds reinvested in community care. The South West London plan involves the possible reduction of 5 hospital sites to 4. Local campaigners say this one, St Helier, faces closure. But the plan's authors say that resources will be shifted into local area teams involving GPs, social care staff and nurses, providing care closer to people's homes. For the Conservatives, Jeremy Hunt said in a written statement that Labour's plan was nonsensical, as the party had previously backed the reforms, which were, he claimed, supported by leading doctors. The Liberal Democrats said the real issue was lack of investment.
Fundamentally, if there's not enough money in the system, however you rejig those services, you're never going to be able to provide the quality of care that is needed. And that's why, as a party, the Liberal Democrats, we are calling for significant investment to be made in the NHS.
NHS leaders believe that the plans, getting more people treated away from hospitals, are essential in response to rising patient demand and stretched resources. Whoever's in government can expect more intense political debate over the process. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
A 20-year-old student has been found guilty of planting a homemade bomb on a London Underground train. Damon Smith, who has Asperger's syndrome, was caught on CCTV last October, leaving a bag filled with explosives in one of the carriages. The train was evacuated minutes before he'd set the device to explode. Our Home Affairs correspondent, June Kelly, has the story.
Alone on a London Underground platform, Damon Smith is caught on CCTV, priming his bomb to explode on the tube. It's inside a rucksack, and he's timed it to go off just after 11 a.m. Surrounded by passengers, he feigns interest in his book. Further down the line, he gets off, but he's abandoned the rucksack in the carriage and left the device packed with ball bearings to detonate. The rucksack was eventually spotted. North Greenwich Station was evacuated. Although parts of the bomb were viable, it failed to explode.
If it had detonated, it certainly would have endangered life. Without a doubt would have caused mass casualties and certainly would have caused substantial damage to the underground system. He had an unhealthy interest in firearms and violence, particularly mass shootings in America. And although he was in possession of some IS material, we cannot prove his motivation or certainly his ideology.
The tape's on.
Yeah. This was Damon Smith in a police interview. He has Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism.
When I was on the tube, I realised I was going to Stratford.
Right.
And I thought it would be a good time to leave my bag for a prank.
A former friend witnessed his developing interest in extremist violence.
He was showing me videos of ISIS grabbing a knife and cutting off people's heads slowly. He was like, doesn't this look sort of fun and all that? I was like, no, it doesn't. It looks a bit wrong, actually.
Hello, everyone. I am going to shoot my gun.
He had posted this on the internet. This pistol fired blank rounds. He also showed off his knife, and he posed on Facebook with a knuckle duster. Damon Smith used an Al-Qaeda bomb-making manual to help him construct his device, but he denied he held extreme political views. He'll be sentenced later this month. June Kelly, BBC News.
Let's have a brief look then at some of the day's other news stories now. Police in Dorset have arrested 4 people in connection with the murder of businessman Guy Hedger. He was shot during a burglary at his home in the early hours of Sunday morning. Sainsbury's say the profits have fallen by more than 8% in the past year, as it warns of a challenging trading market and unpredictability in the value of the pound caused by Brexit. The supermarket says it's trying to avoid passing on the increases to customers by raising prices. Facebook is taking on another 3,000 staff to monitor inappropriate content on the site. The company has been criticised for failing to act quickly enough to remove violent broadcasts on its live streaming service, including some images of murders and suicides. It is 10 years to the day since 3-year-old Madeleine McCann went missing from a holiday apartment in the Portuguese village of Praia da Luz. Her disappearance sparked a massive police search at the time and worldwide attention. But a decade later, despite extensive global inquiries, the investigation remains open, as our correspondent John Kay reports.
10 years. 10 years after everything changed for them. Tonight, Jerry and Kate McCann attended their church in Leicestershire to remember their first child, Madeleine.
It's a family of 4 instead of 5, and it should be a family of 5. So we pray each day.
1,000 miles away, another service tonight in the Portuguese resort of Praia da Luz, where the toddler disappeared during a family holiday.
It's unbelievable that there's been nothing. You know, nobody's found anything.
This comes into my mind every day, every single day.
Jenny Murat is still haunted by what happened. She only lives a few yards from the block where Madeleine and her family were staying. Back then, she set up a stall, appealing for information. But it was something she saw herself that's now reported to be a significant part of this investigation. She remembers driving past the McCann's apartment on the night Madeleine vanished and seeing a young woman acting suspiciously right outside.
I noticed her there and she kind of looked as if she was trying to hide from me. I do remember she was wearing a plum-coloured top.
Jenny Murat says she informed the police at the time, but this is the first time she's talked about it publicly. She also told me she saw a brown car that night, speeding towards the McCann's apartment, going the wrong way down a one-way street.
It was one of the small cars, like the rental cars you have, the normal everyday sort of rental cars.
Were you able to see the driver?
I saw the driver. I was beside the driver going, both of us looked at each other. And I think he had a very British look about him.
Please give our little girl back.
10 years of publicity have produced 10 years of theories, and still no answers.
It's had a huge impact on my personality in the way.
Jenny Murat's son Robert was the first person to be made an arguido, or named suspect in the case. A decade on, his name may have been cleared, but he can't bear to look online.
I'd like to know the truth, not theories. I just want to know why that was the case. It didn't only lead to me being destroyed, it led to my whole family being destroyed and affected by those allegations. It was completely untrue.
You're adamant you were not there that night?
100%.
This resort is now synonymous with what happened to Madeleine, and many here are fed up with all the attention. 10 years, and like the McCann family, this community is still desperate for answers. Well, at exactly this time 10 years ago, the McCanns were outside their apartment here, screaming in the street, frantically searching for help. And you know, since that night, really, we don't know much more. We don't know, despite everything that's been written and said, all the money spent on investigations, and that's perhaps the most extraordinary part of this whole story. We don't know how Madeleine left here. We don't know who she was with. The only thing we know for certain is that she's still missing. Hugh.
John, thanks again. John Kay with the latest there in Praia de Luz. Now, the two candidates hoping to be President of France are going head-to-head in the final live television debate of the election. The latest poll suggesting that the centrist Emmanuel Macron is ahead of his far-right rival Marine Le Pen, but his lead has been narrowing in recent weeks. Both are competing to win over large numbers of apparently undecided and reluctant voters ahead of that final round on Sunday. Our correspondent James Reynolds has been watching the exchanges.
He calls her the candidate of hate. She says he has no qualities. Tonight they meet. Emmanuel Macron, the front-runner, won't want to slip up. He's standing as a pro-EU, pro-immigration centrist, and he's protecting a clear lead in the polls. Marine Le Pen from the Front National is trying to bring him down. I asked her what she wanted from the debate.
What do I expect from the debate? Some clarification from Monsieur Macron. He's still being very vague.
And tonight on French TV, the two candidates faced one another and began immediate attacks.
Mr. Macron is the candidate of savage globalization, Uberization, economic uncertainty, social brutality, of every man for himself.
You have shown you're not the candidate for a balanced democratic debate. The question is, do the people want your defeatist attitude? You say globalization is too hard for us. So is Europe. Let's shut our borders, leave the euro, because others succeed, not us.
The atmosphere got heated. I treat the French like adults, Mr. Macron told his opponent. You lie all the time. Then each was asked about terrorism.
The safety of our people, the fight against terror and Islamist extremism, you don't want to take it on. I know why. Against terrorism, we have to close our borders straight away, immediately. And that's what I'll do the moment I take power.
Closing borders achieves nothing. There are many countries outside the Schengen area that have been hit as hard as us by terrorist attacks. And since 2015, we have put back border controls to fight terrorism.
In this debate, the French people have heard two very different visions. Now they have to pick a side. 2 and a bit hours in, they're still talking and their pictures are pretty clear. Emmanuel Macron accuses his opponent of playing games with people's anger. She accuses him of making a mess of the country. Tough words from both, but no surprises, and that may end up helping the front runner. There are now just 2 full days of campaigning left before Sunday's runoff vote. Hugh.
James, thanks a lot for the latest there in Paris. James Reynolds, our correspondent there. Now, the director of the FBI, James Comey, says he has no regrets about his decision to reopen his investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails just before the US presidential election last year. Mr. Comey said he felt mildly nauseous at the thought that he might have influenced the result, but then insisted he would make the same decision again. He was giving evidence to a Senate committee, and our North America editor John Sopel was watching.
History is likely to judge that this law enforcement officer played a decisive role in determining the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. Just days before polling, James Comey revealed the FBI had reopened its inquiry into Hillary Clinton's emails from when she was Secretary of State. He said he had no good options.
So I stared at Speak and Conceal. Speak would be really bad. There's an election in 11 days. Lordy, that would be really bad. Concealing, in my view, would be catastrophic. Not just to the FBI, but well beyond. And honestly, as between really bad and catastrophic, I said to my team, we've got to walk into the world of really bad.
So how does he feel now about the impact his intervention has had?
Look, this was terrible. It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election. But honestly, it wouldn't change the decision.
What's not in doubt is that his letter, 11 days before America voted, convulsed the campaign. Its significance can't be overstated. This was Donald Trump the day the news broke.
The investigation is the biggest political scandal since Watergate, and it's everybody's hope that justice at last can be delivered.
And Hillary Clinton has now made clear she believes that James Comey may have cost her the election.
I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off.
But Donald Trump on Twitter attacks Hillary Clinton and seemingly has a swipe at James Comey too. FBI Director Comey was the best thing that ever happened to Hillary Clinton in that he gave her a free pass for many bad deeds. The question is, why did the FBI make public the email investigation and not the parallel inquiry into the Trump campaign's links with Russia? The answer seems to be that Congress had been told the email investigation was complete, and therefore reopening it needed Congress to be told again. It's an explanation that baffles many Democrats. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Well, as we were saying a little earlier, the general election is 5 weeks away, but tomorrow voters will be taking part in local and mayoral elections in England, Wales and Scotland. It's a major exercise in local democracy, with councils supplying essential services to millions of people. Our political correspondent Vicky Young is here to explain the range of contests taking place tomorrow. Vicky.
Well, Hugh, it's very rare for local elections to be held in the middle of a general election campaign, and all the parties will be hoping for signs that they're making progress. Almost 5,000 seats are up for grabs, but none in Northern Ireland. In Scotland, these elections involve all 32 councils and were last contested in 2012. Back then, the SNP won the most seats, but Labour wasn't far behind. A key battleground this time will be Glasgow City Council, where Labour's held overall control since 1980. In Wales, all 22 councils are being elected. Labour performed strongly 5 years ago, and it's defending almost 600 seats, far more than any other party. Plaid Cymru and the Tories are hoping for gains, and UKIP could build on its good showing in the Welsh Assembly elections. In England, there are 34 elections, most of them for county councils, and this is a traditional area of strength for the Conservatives, who have twice as many seats as Labour. The Liberal Democrats are hoping to claw back some of the ground they've lost over the past few years, and Labour's strength will be tested in the councils they control in Derbyshire, Lancashire and Nottinghamshire. So, with a general election next month, how much should we read into tomorrow's results?
That will give us an indication of whether the Conservatives really are a long way ahead in the opinion polls, whether they really are advancing in Scotland. Are Labour really in trouble across the length and breadth of Great Britain? But of course we shouldn't assume that what happens on Thursday will necessarily be replicated exactly in the general election ballot boxes.
Now, 6 areas of England will elect new metro mayors: Greater Manchester, Liverpool, the West Midlands, Tees Valley, the West of England and Cambridge and Peterborough. They'll mostly be responsible for economic development. Doncaster and North Tyneside are also voting for local authority mayors. Now, local elections won't necessarily tell us much about how people might vote in a national contest, but as the results come in on Friday, party leaders will seize on anything that suggests they have momentum heading into that general election on June the 8th. Hugh.
Vicky, thanks very much again. Vicky Young there, looking forward to the local elections tomorrow. Now, it's the most prominent arts prize in Britain, and for years it's been the preserve of young British artists. But this year, for the first time since 1991, the Turner Prize has scrapped the age limit, and 2 artists over 50 have made it to the shortlist. Our arts correspondent David Sillitoe has been speaking to one of them.
You certainly didn't expect this.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. I mean, it does make me laugh.
It's been a strange day for Lubaina Hamid. She's painted for more than 35 years and today, at the age of 62, is on the Turner Prize shortlist. Her paintings bring black lives and faces to often very white art galleries. And this is perhaps her signature work, 100 life-size portraits made when...
You were 50.
I was.
Did you think that national recognition was probably past you by then?
Probably.
And now?
Well, I hadn't thought about the Turner Prize in terms of, I don't know, nominations or shortlisting for a couple of decades, you know.
Born in Zanzibar, she's lived and taught here in Preston for more than 25 years. And she's not alone. The other nominees, Hervin Anderson, Andrea Butner and Rosalind Nashershibi, are all of mature years.
This jury and the Turner Prize has perhaps looked back at certain artists that were unfairly overlooked and decided to open it up to those that maybe deserve a second chance or that flourish later in life.
And it's certainly been a year of flourishing for Lubaina and her life's ambition.
I'm making a space where other black audiences can feel at home, where they can look at these cutouts and think, oh, that looks a bit like my auntie, or oh, that's kind of got the demeanour I've got, or it's like being home, it's like being in amongst people you know. It's that making a space in an art gallery where you're not the only person of colour.
David Sillitoe, BBC News, Preston.
And the usual reminder that news now's coming up on BBC Two. Here's Evan.
Ramping up the rhetoric, tension with the neighbours. Britain is in danger of finding the rest of Europe uniting against it. We'll be getting perspectives from the UK and the EU, asking who is provoking whom and how we're going to negotiate a decent Brexit deal. Join me now on BBC Two.
That's Newsnight with Evan here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.